At 8:17 on Monday morning, his manager moves a chair closer and asks for one more impossible quarter. The strange part is not the request. It is the number sitting quietly in his savings account. $24,000. For the first time, losing the job would not become an emergency before lunch. $24,000 will not fund the rest of his life. It will not replace health insurance, survive every market, or make work disappear. It does something narrower and more immediate. At $4,000 of core monthly spending, it buys 6 months before the next paycheck becomes necessary. 6 months changes the sentence he can say in this room. Most people imagine one enormous line. Below it, work is mandatory. Above it, work is optional. Real life is messier and more useful. Optionality arrives in stages. One balance prevents panic. Another permits a resignation. Another supports a year of reinvention. A much larger balance may support long-term withdrawals. Each line unlocks a different behavior, not a different social class. This story follows one fictional composite worker. His core expenses are $4,000 a month, or $48,000 a year. Those figures are illustrations, not national instructions. Housing, debt, family size, taxes, insurance, and location can move the real number dramatically. The method travels. The dollar figure does not. The calculation begins with the money that must leave, not the salary that arrives. His gross income sounds impressive. His core burn is what determines runway. Rent, groceries, utilities, transportation, insurance, minimum debt payments, and basic care belong in the first pass. Vacations, upgrades, and optional subscriptions belong in a second ring. The Bureau of Labor Statistics reported average annual expenditures of $78,535 for American consumer units in 2024. The same release showed a wide range across income groups. An average can describe a country. It cannot price this man's freedom. His ledger matters more than a national midpoint. The first threshold is much smaller than 6 months. In the Federal Reserve's 2024 household survey, 63% of adults said they could cover a hypothetical $400 emergency using cash or its equivalent. That is not independence. It is the first separation between a broken tire and a revolving balance. For this household, $4,000 equals 1 month of core spending. That month is not enough for a dramatic exit. It is enough to keep one delayed paycheck from deciding which bill misses its date. Work is still required. Panic is slightly less required. That distinction is modest, but it changes the first 48 hours of a shock. The Federal Reserve also asked whether households had rainy day savings sufficient for 3 months of expenses. In 2024, 55% of adults said they did. For this ledger, 3 months equals $12,000. That balance cannot guarantee a good outcome. It can turn a layoff from an immediate cash crisis into a search with a clock. 3 months sounds generous, until the first month contains a severance delay, a medical bill, and the deductible on a damaged car. Runway is not time off. It is time under uncertainty. The balance buys a better search, but every surprise shortens it. This is why an emergency fund and a permanent portfolio cannot be treated as the same object. At 6 months, the number reaches $24,000. This is the first line that changes how he speaks to a boss. It does not make resignation wise, it makes resignation possible. Those words are not synonyms. A bad meeting no longer has to be endured because rent arrives in 14 days. The cost of saying no becomes measurable. Before the reserve, he says the deadline is difficult. After the reserve, he says the deadline is impossible without removing scope. Same employee, same manager, same office. The account never appears in the conversation, yet it changes the negotiation. Silent wealth often works this way. The money is invisible because its first purchase is a different sentence. Leaving costs more than monthly bills. Employer health coverage may end. A replacement plan can have premiums, deductibles, and timing rules. Taxes do not pause. A car repair still arrives. A household with children carries different obligations. 6 months of a clean spreadsheet can become 4 months in a lived year. The optional line needs a margin for friction. There is another trap in the headline balance. A worker may have $200,000 in a retirement account and very little cash outside it. The Internal Revenue Service says early distributions from many retirement plans and traditional IRAs generally face an additional 10% tax before age 59 and a half, unless an exception applies. A balance can be large and still be awkward runway. Cash handles next month. A diversified portfolio may serve a longer horizon. A tax-advantaged retirement account may serve later decades. Equity in a home may be valuable without paying Tuesday's groceries. Net worth combines them on one page. Optionality separates them by access, volatility, tax treatment, and time. The SEC investor education site describes savings accounts as suitable for short-term goals and emergency funds. Long-term investing involves market risk and time. It also notes that short-term money generally belongs somewhere accessible without major tax penalties or fees. The first optional line is therefore built from money available when the office door closes, not merely money listed on an annual statement. At $48,000, the ledger reaches 1 full year of core expenses. This changes the kind of choice available. 6 months can support an exit. 12 months can support a transition, training, a careful search, a small business test, or a move to a cheaper city. The money still declines each month. The path is wider, not permanent. A year of runway can look like a year of vacation. That is the fastest way to turn freedom back into urgency. If income stops completely, every month becomes a withdrawal. The account is doing 2 jobs at once, paying bills and purchasing time to build the next income source. Without a transition plan, the second job never begins. Suppose part-time work covers $2,000 of the $4,000 monthly burn. The portfolio now covers only the remaining $2,000. $48,000 stops representing 12 months and starts representing 24. Nothing magical happened to the account. The denominator changed. A smaller job can make the same balance much more powerful. This is where the title becomes more interesting. Work can become optional before income becomes optional. At half the old workload, the account lasts twice as long. At a lower core burn, it lasts longer again. The first practical freedom may not be retirement. It may be choosing fewer hours, better clients, a safer manager, or work worth keeping. At $240,000, the same household holds 5 years of core expenses before considering growth, taxes, or inflation. That does not make the money permanent. It creates a very long bridge. A career can be rebuilt inside 5 years. A bad industry can be left. A family can absorb more than one mistake without every decision becoming irreversible. 5 years of today's spending is not 5 years of fixed prices. The SEC investor education site identifies inflation as a risk because it erodes purchasing power. If essential prices rise, the far shore moves away while the bridge is being crossed. Cash provides stability, but too much long-term cash can lose real buying power. Long-term assets introduce the opposite problem. They may grow, but they fluctuate. The SEC investor education site states plainly that all investments involve risk. Time horizon and risk tolerance matter. Money intended for next month's rent cannot behave like money intended for a distant retirement. The optional line fails if a market decline forces a sale at the worst moment. The order of returns matters after withdrawals begin. A decline early in a long withdrawal period can do more damage than the same decline later because expenses still require sales while the portfolio is down. This is called sequence risk. It is one reason a permanent-looking number cannot promise permanent freedom. Now the enormous line finally appears. $48,000 multiplied by 25 equals $1,200,000. That is the arithmetic behind a 4% initial withdrawal. 48,000 is 4% of 1.2 million. The multiplication is exact. The future it describes is not. William Bengen's 1994 research used historical market data to study initial retirement withdrawals and 30-year periods. The work became associated with the 4% rule. It was a historical planning result under specific portfolio and spending assumptions, not a law of nature, not a guarantee, and not automatically designed for a retirement lasting 50 years. The 4% framework does not mean every portfolio safely produces a 4% dividend. It describes a first-year withdrawal from a portfolio, followed by assumptions about later spending and inflation. Withdrawals can include selling assets. Taxes, fees, and allocation matter. Market order, lifespan, and flexibility matter too. A slogan removes the very conditions that make the research understandable. Vanguard's retirement income research describes dynamic spending as adjusting withdrawals when markets change. Spending a little less in weak years and more in strong years can reduce the risk of draining a portfolio faster than expected. That flexibility can improve resilience. It also means the income is not a perfectly fixed paycheck. A household can make the large line more honest by splitting spending again. Essential expenses need stronger protection. Flexible expenses can move with markets. If all $48,000 is treated as untouchable consumption, the plan is brittle. If $12,000 can shrink during a bad year, the household has another shock absorber. There is another line before 1.2 million. At $600,000, a 4% initial withdrawal equals $24,000, or half this household's core annual spending. If part-time work supplies the other half, full-time work becomes optional under the illustration. The portfolio is not funding life alone. It is funding choice alongside work. $600,000 does not guarantee $24,000 forever. The 4% figure is an initial planning reference, and the underlying assets can decline. A concentrated portfolio makes the line more fragile. The SEC Investor Education site explains that diversification can reduce risk, but cannot guarantee against loss. The word "can" is doing real work. Debt can push the optional line upward in two ways. Monthly payments increase the burn, and high interest can compete with investment returns. A $48,000 core budget with a temporary loan payment is not the same as a permanent $48,000 lifestyle. The ledger needs dates beside obligations, not one frozen annual total. Later life income can reduce how much a portfolio must supply. Social Security, pensions, and other reliable income sources may matter. But an employee leaving work decades before those payments begin has to bridge the gap. A retirement number copied from someone near 65 may be dangerously incomplete for someone much younger. Health coverage deserves its own ledger because leaving a job can change both premiums and exposure to large bills. A worker may qualify for a marketplace enrollment period after losing job-based coverage, but the actual cost depends on household and location. Treating an employer premium as the entire cost can make the optional line look cheaper than it is. $48,000 of spending may require more than $48,000 of gross withdrawals. Account type, cost basis, ordinary income, capital gains, state rules, and credits can change the tax result. The script cannot calculate a personal tax bill from one annual expense number. Any plan pretending otherwise has hidden its most complicated page. Back in the conference room, None of these formulas are visible. The manager sees only a worker who no longer rushes to fill silence. That is why the earliest stages matter. Permanent retirement may require a 7-figure portfolio. A credible no can require a fraction of that. Optionality begins where dependence loses its deadline. He does not resign that morning. This matters. Having an exit changes the value of staying. He can remain because the revised project is acceptable, not because Friday's paycheck is holding the apartment together. Optional work is not work abandoned. It is work reclassified from necessity toward choice. The account did not buy a yacht, a vacation, or an early retirement announcement. It bought 6 months of core runway, a stronger negotiation, and the ability to leave before fear made the decision. The same money could not fund a lifetime. It did not need to. Its first job was changing the power of one ordinary Monday. 1 year of core expenses would buy a different class of decision: training, relocation, a slower search, or a tested business. It would still be a declining balance. Calling it permanent freedom would be false. Calling it powerless until it reaches 1 million would also be false. Capital changes behavior before it replaces income. Under the illustration, $600,000 paired with a 4% initial withdrawal could cover half the annual core burn in year 1. Part-time work could cover the rest. That arrangement still carries market, tax, inflation, health, and longevity risk. But it reveals a middle territory the single giant number hides. Enough capital to make full-time work negotiable. $1,200,000 is the 25 times reference for $48,000 of annual spending. It is a planning starting point, not a finish line certificate. A longer horizon, inflexible spending, concentrated assets, high taxes, expensive insurance, or bad early returns may require more resilience. Other income and flexible spending may reduce the portfolio burden. The wrong question is one number asked without a verb. Enough money to do what? To survive a car repair? To refuse overtime? To leave a bad job? To retrain for a year? To work 3 days a week? To fund decades without earned income. Each verb has a different price, account, risk, and clock. The smallest honest formula is accessible assets divided by monthly core spending. The result is months of runway. It does not forecast returns. It does not solve taxes. It does not price health risk. It answers one clean question. How long can the household keep its basic promises if earned income stops today? The long-term formula needs more than division. It needs a horizon, asset allocation, spending policy, tax estimate, insurance plan, later income, and a response to weak markets. That is where individualized planning begins. A multiplier can open the conversation. It cannot complete it. The latter now looks different. $400 absorbs one small shock. $4,000 covers one illustrative month. $12,000 matches 3 months. $24,000 creates a 6-month exit. $48,000 funds a 1-year transition. $600,000 can illustrate half replacement. $1.2 million is the 25 times reference. None of the rungs means the same thing. By Friday, the revised quarter is difficult but possible. He presents the plan without apologizing for its limits. The reserve still sits untouched. That is the quietest form of capital. Money doing its job without being spent. It has changed the tone of a conversation, the boundary of a project, and the reason he remains in the room. The office door remains open behind him. He may use it someday. He may never need to. Optionality is not proven by walking through every exit. It is proven when staying no longer requires pretending the exit is locked. The first meaningful line is the one that changes a decision before it changes a lifestyle. One giant retirement number can keep moving farther away. A sequence of honest thresholds reveals which freedom is already close. The next calculation is not whether the account has reached some stranger's finish line. It is which sentence, hour, client, or exit becomes available at the next rung. What would the first optional line change in his life?